and welcome to our first Aloha Sunday in a long time. And you see it says it got mana with an exclamation, but it was actually supposed to be a question mark, kind of like the takeoff of got milk, but I think that works too. It's got mana feeling. And a little over 50 years ago, Kumu and Nana Viri actually started Aloha Sunday in 1975. And actually, I'm sorry, Kumu Brenda, it's Kumu Brenda Mohalapua. So Ignacio. So there was a May Day, so we have a preschool here. And in 1975, where the administration building is, there was a Nana Viri, and I will talk about her book, Change We Must, in a little bit. But Kumu Brenda was working with a preschool, and she was doing a May Day celebration, and Nana Viri saw Kumu and stopped her and asked her if she would be interested in bringing that to the church. And all these years later now, we celebrate Aloha Sunday. So I want to thank Kumu Brenda and, of course, giving thanks to Nana Viri, who inspired this service. And as we continue on bringing Aloha Sundays to each and every one of you and to these islands, we just give great thanks that we still have Kapuna here, especially the founder of Aloha Sunday and their family. Thank you, Papa Robert. And I just want to thank you as well for coming out today. I am just really grateful to be bringing this message. And I worked with Kumu Brenda this week because we were talking about Aloha Sunday and about this concept of mana, of spiritual energy. And what does it mean to have that spiritual energy? How important is it in our daily lives to have it? And how do we cultivate spiritual energy or mana? So today we will actually be talking about the components that bring it all together, and especially pono, or being pono, living pono, and finding that resolve and that peace within you. So in Hawaiian culture, mana refers to the spiritual power, and to acquire it, we can do it by many ways. We can work in malama the aina, or take care of the land. We can also, or we're also called to malama our bodies, our minds. We're called to practice forgiveness. We're called to be of service to our families, to our communities, in order to cultivate that spiritual power. Each one of us has a seed of divinity within. And when we serve selflessly, when we love, when we give, and when we uphold and stand on the truth, we start to cultivate that spiritual power. How many of you feel that you are living in every moment just being pono? Whether you're driving on the H1, whether you're watching the television out at the beach, are you living? Are you living in the essence and presence of righteousness? And if not, how do we get to that place within that develops that spiritual power? So Pali J. Lee, in her book Ho'opono, writes, if it is good, if it is balanced, if it is right, if it helps, if it honors, if it's humble, if it is peaceful, if it is neat, if it is correct, if it is proper, if it is well-mannered, it is pono. Mana takes action, and being pono is the way of getting there. Acquiring that and living our lives every single day, seeing the divinity within each one. And as June spoke up here and reading Kumu Brenda's writing, we were called to look at several aspects of being pono, of making things right. Right now we have what seems to be a country that is completely divided. We have a left and a right. We may also find this division within our families and within our communities as well. And oftentimes, if we look at our thoughts, we'll find a division there. We will find two opposing views or two opposing thoughts trying to take the lead. We will find two news sources giving different information, trying to be the loudest voice in the community or on the television. And how do we avoid being trapped in everyday conversation and rising above so we don't lose that power? Because mana actually comes from God. That is the source and the supply of all things of power, spiritual power within us. And so in order to, since Pono is living and mana is living, and it calls each one of us to be in that living presence, I'll go over some things that if we take a look at our lives, if we start to do an introspective search, we can also see if we're actually in alignment. The first thing is, when you go about your day, how are you treating others? How are you treating others? Do you, despite the appearance of, let's say, behavior that does not really coincide with what you want somebody to do you still see the spark of divinity within the person? Are you actively listening without judgment when you have a conversation with someone? Or are you trying to get your word in before they finish? Do you speak with honesty and compassion? They say to be tough on the problem, but compassionate with the person. When you talk to the ones that you love, do you have that loving presence of God come through you? Or oftentimes you find yourself quite upset if there's an argument or the unwillingness to listen. In order to be Pono, we are called to treat others with kindness and respect. And Kuma Brenda also gave me this triangle, and actually, Reverend Ryan, you have that, the Lokahi triangle. And it talks about God and the Aina, and we do have a ministry here at Unity Church of Hawaii that talks about, or that actually is in action. It's called Aloha Aina. And one way that we can be Pono with the world is to care for the land. When you see the campus today, you'll notice that we have done some improvements because there is a mighty team out there that comes here almost every single day to malama the land, to take care of it, to be stewards of it. When you touch the ground, when you touch the earth, when you work with the Aina, there is a healing presence with it. It grounds you. You start to feel the essence of Mother Earth. And when we take care of the land, it tells us a lot about what we believe true about God. When you can see that God is living within all the plants, that God is in the water, that everything living needs to be cared for, needs to be nurtured, to include the land. We start to develop that mana within. We start to get that spiritual power because we're not seeing a separation then between the outside and the inside. We're starting to see that it is all one. Another way that we look at being Pono is being accountable for our actions. There was a time where I would say, particularly in church communities, but where sometimes the pastor or maybe the board or whatever, they didn't have much accountability. I know here in this community, our leadership is accountable. But when we can come from a place of honesty, when we do all things in integrity, we are being Pono. We have a great team here now. And so we are looking for that. This is how we are being in church with one another. This is how we're cultivating that mana, that spiritual energy. And as a membership, each one of us is being called to honesty, to integrity, to being accountable for our actions, and sometimes for our inactions. And whenever we are wrong, just admitting that we made a mistake. Oftentimes I find that the reason why people don't admit that something has gone wrong is because they fear punishment. And when we fear punishment, or if we are treating others as if there is a punishment because they have made a mistake, then we're actually taking that grace out of our actions. If you notice somebody in your community, in your family, at the workplace, make a mistake, it's a wonderful opportunity to then be loving to them, to be understanding. When we can have more people stand up and just take accountability, to nurture that within themselves, to become Pono with the truth, we'll see a world change. First, always on the inside, and then, of course, on the outside. I also wanted to talk about just being Pono with ourselves. How many of us are taking good care of our bodies, exercising, eating right, not overindulging in things? This is a holy temple, and treating it like a temple is absolutely important in order to maintain that mana, that spiritual energy, to be Pono with ourselves. And how we treat this temple says a lot about what we believe about ourselves. Everything is food. Whether you're watching television, whether you're eating something, everything is feeding something within you. Are the things that you're looking at and listening to, is it of the highest nourishment? Are you overindulging in things that have a negative effect or are speaking in negativity? If so, then you're taking away from your own power. You're taking away from your connectedness to what the truth is. When we can refrain from indulging in or overindulging in things, we start to draw closer to the truth of God, in, through, and as us. And when we can start to also cultivate the generosity, the gratitude, and June, you had spoken about in Kumu Brenda's writing that even in the hardest of times, we're called to have an air of gratitude about us. When was the last time that you had something happen, probably something that you felt was devastating, or you felt that it could have gone better, let's say, but instead of staying in that negative mindset, did you flip the switch and instead practice gratitude? Instead, give thanks. I tell you, the moment that you can look at a situation that seemingly was meant to harm you, when you can turn into the state of gratitude, when you can just be the presence and give thanks to God, that God is present within it, you will see all sorts of things change in the situation. Oftentimes, we are programmed to instead focus on the negative. And what we sow our seeds into, like I was talking about last week with faith, is what we're going to cultivate and grow more of. And when we're pono with these things in our lives, whether it's with the husband, whether it is with our boss, when we can start to be more loving, to be more mindful of how we are interacting with one another, we start to strengthen our bond and our spiritual power within. I understand that relationships can be hard, that not everybody is agreeable, that there are difficult personalities out there, that there are people that seem to just want to make no good in your life. But what is the higher call? We are being called to rise above this situation. Now, we practice safe boundaries because that is part of taking care of ourselves. But we're also not called to continue on negative thinking about the person. Do you believe a person benefits by your negative thinking, or do you believe they can benefit by your positive thinking? Do they need a prayer more than they need a curse from you? Absolutely. And your words have that energy, that spiritual energy as well. And when we speak to one another, are we speaking life into one another? They say you should use your words for three things: to bless, to prosper, and to heal. If you are not blessing a situation, if you are not prospering your situation, and if you are not healing a situation with your words, then silence is often the best thing to do. When we set on this journey of becoming Pono, we're talking about becoming right with all things, to have right action, to have right thinking, to have right speaking, right intentions. I know that everyone has heard of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I believe that might be a golden rule or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. But we're being called to get right with one another. That during times such as these, that it will do us better as a humankind to be in agreement, to have a common purpose. And that's why communities such as these are beneficial, because most of us here are gathered for one thing, for God and for God only, to be in community with one another, to serve, to love more. And when we find that commonality, we actually start to build that spiritual energy together. They say where two or more are gathered, it will be done unto them, that we strengthen that. So being Pono is one of the ways, because it's so integrated and it's so action-based, into having spiritual power. And when we look at the principle, about mana, we're also looking at this foundational concept in Hawaiian spirituality, that all things have a life force. You have a life force. Have you ever been to a sacred space or to a place and you just felt more alive? And sometimes that might just be our own homes, when we just get out of the busyness of the world and we go back to that sacred space at our house and we feel the energy there. And for those of you that do a lot of prayer and meditation, especially in your homes, you often find that as soon as you step in, you have a peace and a calm that washes over you. And so that is why we do these things. This is why we start to look at becoming right with one another and ourselves and the Aina. Because we're looking to cultivate that power within us, that connection within us that is always from God. I was going to go into one of this other thing, but I think it would just take a little too long. But so I will look at a different section. But for personal mana, first of all, for a kumuhula, it takes years and years of just cultivating that precision, knowing what the body is doing, feeling the essence of each and every move, knowing the story. When they practice over and over again, when they tell the story over and over, it starts to strengthen within them. There is a power in hula. There is a power in dance. There is a power in words. Whenever you do something over and over and become so precise in it, you're starting to gain power in that area. That spiritual energy is already within you, and it's asking to be cultivated. And when you tie it into right living, it starts to grow even more. There are gurus out there that as soon as you step near them, you can just feel their energy. They've been cultivating their relationship with God. But mana, or that spiritual energy, that spiritual power, doesn't just come overnight. Now, there are instances in Hawaiian spirituality where if somebody is about to make a transition, they can breathe the breath, and then it transfers to the person. But what I'm talking about is for everyday living. And mana actually can be diminished as well. This is one thing that in the readings this week, I started to realize, is that it's just, what are we cultivating within our own lives as far as spiritual power goes? Are we cultivating that life of God within? And I can just take an example of, let's say, when somebody is given spiritual power or even power in anything, and they start to abuse it, you will lose it. I remember giving my daughter a freedom to do something one day, just to see how she would, the power to make a decision all by herself without me ever interjecting. And she made probably the worst decision ever with this. And so then I knew that I had to withdraw that energy, that power that I gave to her, because she was not ready for it. So when we spend years cultivating this energy, we do it through prayer. We do it through meditation. We do it through just cultivating the land or what have you. We're starting to kind of just in consciousness show that we are ready for something more. When you can be trusted with the small things, the bigger things come. And that is the thing about it, is that when you can give your energy and attention to doing the things that are right, to doing the things that are going to help the world, you start to see and you start to feel, and people will start to sense a different presence about you. They will start to say, you know, that Reverend Ryan, there's something special about him. That Rain, you know, I don't know what it is, but she has an energy about her, and I just love being around her. Or the Ralph who's walking around, I don't know, but every time around him, I just feel so good. It's because they're sensing something about you. They're feeling something that you've probably, without even knowing sometimes, were cultivating. You were growing it. People find comfort with people who have worked and done the work because they're a blessing to this world. And each one of us, that's what this call is, to really just be the blessing, to get right with one another, Tomorrow is never guaranteed, not for one of us. Today is the only time we have, and it is now presence. We don't want to leave this earth with unforgiveness on our heart, to where we have given away our power to something outside of ourselves. Cultivating, becoming one with, and agreement with, to live in unity with one another, to finding things that you have in common rather than to see the differences, to make right where you can, to love, to also just be that presence. There's somebody waiting for you to just show your gift to the world. And as we just take a look and we just go into, we start to look at our own lives. Are there areas in your life where you can make right? Are there areas that deserve more honesty? Is there a community that needs service from you? There's this power within. And when we cultivate it, when we grow it, and ultimately when we share it, we start to change this world bit by bit. How much mana do you have? And how much mana are you willing to share to make this world a better place? And as we close the outer eyes, we just look into those spaces in us that wish to just give more, forgive more, to relax more, to become in alignment with. And as we breathe into this time and this space, we're just calling on the presence of God within. Looking at all areas of our life. Looking at the things that we can make right now. Looking at the forgiveness we can give ourselves and each other. Looking at the gifts and the spiritual power that we can share to the world. Let us take this into the silence. And breathing in and just giving great thanks that this presence, this power is within. We say thank you, God.